My stomach literally twisted as I approached the entrance to the restaurant. I had no idea if I could eat anything. Just as I was about to open the door, a gust of wind came and knocked the umbrella out of my hands. Some of the water, which it had saved because it was a damn cheap and almost useless umbrella, got on my face and in my hair, which I had spent hours styling especially for this occasion. The doorman opened the door as I started to lash out and nearly knocked me down. Apologizing, he took my hand and supported me. I was sure my hair was not intact. Sighing, I walked past him to the front desk. Prime Angus Steakhouse was one of the most popular restaurants in the Windy City, which was our hometown. Well, maybe only in my hometown. I would have to see what answers this evening would yield, but I was hoping to say we again when all was said and done. It wasn't Jean and Georgetti's, but Josh remembered that I always wanted to eat here even after all this time. Mr. and Mrs. Conrad, I introduced myself to the maitre d' when he looked up. 7:30. Oh, this is Alice and Joshua, he said cheerfully. One moment, please. We'll show you to your table shortly. The restaurant was known for using first and last names in its reservation system. It was funny, and at the same time nice to hear our names mentioned out loud and in the same sentence again. My hair may have been messed up, but you can't rip the smile off my face with a nail hammer. I was informed that Josh hadn't arrived yet, but the host took me to our table anyway. 5 minutes later, I was sipping white wine from a glass. I wanted to surprise my husband by ordering his favorite drink, but I changed my mind, thinking it might seem presumptuous. I didn't want to do or say anything tonight that might interfere with our possibly happy reunion. Looking forward to seeing Josh for the first time in almost a year, I remembered the best times, truly wonderful times, in our relationship. Josh and I met a week after I graduated from college. My father had helped me get a job at Wilkins and Bather LLC, a large accounting firm. Josh was a high-profile client as a result of his parents' untimely death and a very large inheritance, not to mention a trust fund. Our firm managed the fund, and we were consumed with distributing the assets he inherited. At the time, I had nothing to do with Josh's finances. I was just an entry-level accountant. We both fell in love with each other at first sight, started dating, and married 15 months later. In fact, it was my firm that suggested we draw up a prenuptial agreement that would be agreed upon by all parties. What I loved most about my husband was his charisma and energy. His personality was a perfect match for mine. In those early years, before and after we were married, we could talk about anything. The way he explained everything and the passion he exuded made me see him as a man beyond his years of maturity. I suddenly remembered the night it all ended, the night Josh had fallen into silence. It had happened on Valentine's Day the year before, and all credit to me. For the first 3 years, Josh and I had a relationship like a fairy tale. The love, the sex, the companionship, it was all there, and I was content. Content. That word began to plague me and even haunt me. The spoon of tar in my honey barrel of contentment turned out to be one Brett Stratton. He, too, was a wealthy client of my firm, and by the time I met him, I was well on my way to a junior partner position. We all know how history unfolds. Heck, even I knew what was involved at the time, but I went ahead and bought it anyway. The slight flirtation made me tremble with anticipation. Dressing better, sexier, on days when I knew he'd be in the office made me tremble even more. Turning down his lunch invitation the first time added as much excitement to the game as finally accepting his offer. Then light touches on my arm or knee took the game and the risk to a new level. I had everything under control until I did. Josh was as excited about our company party as I was. After all, he knew a lot of people there. By the time we were married, Josh had taken his hobby of tool patenting to a new level, and the week before the party, we did a surprise demonstration at a London company. As for my husband, I didn't even have any doubts. He advised me to have fun at the party, but not too much. He promised to visit me at midnight on the day of the party to make sure I was okay. I knew it was more than that, but I didn't believe he had any reason to suspect me of anything inappropriate. Brett filled my glass that night, but to be honest with myself, I was already allowing for a 30% chance that given the right circumstances, Brett and I would work something out. Maybe we'd end up just kissing, but deep down I knew I'd never completely ruled out sex. In a dark conference room with the door closed and the curtains drawn, I had my first bout of cheating. The sex was great. Really good, mind-blowing sex. If it hadn't been, I would never have gone back to the well. I wondered why none of the staff noticed our absence when we returned to the party almost an hour later. I didn't feel guilty until I got in my car and rushed home, reaching the house only 4 minutes before Josh called. "Miss!" I was stunned, coming back to the present. "Are you still waiting for your guest?" I frowned and looked at my phone. Josh was 20 minutes late, despite the grace period. I apologized to the waiter and decided to order an appetizer for the two of us to avoid a possible embarrassment. I wondered where he was. Another fleeting thought that crossed my mind, I immediately pushed it to the back of my mind. With a noticeable chill, I mentally went back to those fateful few weeks after the party. Josh called at exactly midnight, as promised. I pulled myself together and dealt with it, and by the time we said goodnight to each other, I was sure he had no idea what I'd done. Lying in bed that night, I reflected on my predicament. There had been no Martian ray gun, there was no sudden loss of brain function. I knew what had happened and why. Well, mostly why. When I thought about the wonderful sex I'd just had and what had led up to it, my mind began to clear. I was sure I should give Brett another spin or two, maybe 3, but that was the end of it. I convinced myself that this was something just for me, different from what Josh and I had. I dismissed the idea like a rag, the way most cheaters or porn addicts do when they're in a serious relationship. I also knew that Brett meant nothing to me, at least not as much as my husband. The next time Brett and I met was after one of our lunches. In addition to another round of amazing sex, I received the gift of a disposable cell phone. Brett knew Josh, or at least knew of him. They had met at 2 events at different companies where both employees and clients were in attendance. Both knew about each other's money. Looking back, Brett might have been a little jealous that Josh's fortune was considerably larger than his own, but he never showed it out loud. From the Christmas party until early February, we were together 3 times, and not once was Josh's name mentioned, either before or during our conversations in bed. I had only made a promise to myself 3 times, so I should have stopped it. If I had, everything would have changed. The spoonful of tar in the honey barrel became a real intrusion 2 days before Valentine's Day. Brett texted me from a burner phone, something he'd never done before. He usually called during the hours I was at work. He wanted to spend a few hours with me, on Valentine's Day. I told him no right away. He insisted and almost begged. He asked me to find out what my plans were with Josh and for how long. He assured me that we would date within those terms and I would get home on time. I put up obstacles. I made excuses for even the obvious things. I played into his hands. I also knew I would give in before I even said it out loud. Everything inside me was screaming at me not to do it, but I ignored my inner voice and threw common sense to the wind. There was no sex that day. I apologized for working a few more hours, promising Josh that it wouldn't interfere with our special evening. Brett and I met at a fancy restaurant on the south side, far from my house. My only gift that night was a very expensive necklace, which meant only one thing, and that was bringing me back from my fairy tale. Brett had fallen in love with me, and I couldn't have that. I refused his gift, which he didn't handle very well. We argued until we noticed the same looks from the staff and visitors. Then he pleaded with me passionately, and I gave a long list of reasons why we would never be a couple. As a result, we arrived at the restaurant 20 minutes later than we should have. When I realized this, I panicked and ordered Brett to drive me back to the office to get my car. Now I had to arrive 45 minutes later than I had promised Josh. Maybe I would have gotten over it and things would have ended peacefully that night without anyone but Brett and I finding out about anything. If it hadn't been for the flat tire, we never would have been discovered. Well, that and that damn call tracking app. To this day, I have no idea how or what caused the flat tire. It was raining and Brett was desperately trying to change it himself, concerned about my lateness and the possible consequences. At least his heart was fine, but he never fully mastered this life skill. When I looked out the fogged windshield 40 minutes later and saw my husband's resentful face through the streams of rain, I thought my life had been cut short, and not figuratively. It seemed like a very long time had passed, but probably only 30 seconds had passed when Brett saw that he was just standing there too. I assumed, but never found out for sure, that he had quickly walked to the front of the car to try to make some kind of excuse. Whatever arguments he made, they weren't being heard. Josh kept his eyes on me until Brett was done, at which point my husband slapped him across the face with a swing, causing Brett to fall to the cold asphalt. That finally made me get up from my seat and jump out of the car. Josh had already turned his back to me when I begged him to stop, and I squatted down to help my lover. Brett had fallen into the wet street, and his $5,000 suit was completely ruined. Seeing that he was okay, I ran after my husband until I felt someone grab my arm tightly, holding me in place. "Let him go," Brett said sternly but gently. "He'll need a minute, or a day. And he's in no mood to talk to you right now. I can tell you that if I were him, I'd want to be alone." His look told me he was a he after the way I treated his gift and his feelings for me. "I need to go to him," I cried. "Let me go!" Brett saw the situation for what it was. He was the only one of the three of us who wasn't in the clouds. He let go of my hand and shook his head. "Then go," he warned me. "But it won't do you any good. Get your stuff out of the car and call a cab. I'm going to the emergency room to see if my jaw is broken." I saw the maitre d' heading toward my table, and I stopped thinking about Valentine's Day past. Damn, these people were impatient. "Madam," he began, "may I ask for your guest's phone number? May I help him to make sure he's okay?" God, I thought, what's going on? But then I realized that they were probably watching me and wondering why I wasn't calling or texting my husband. "No," I replied emphatically. "He's on his way. I just heard from him." I picked up my empty glass and twirled it gently in my hand. "I'd certainly like another, please." The waitress who was standing right behind him snapped out of her seat in a flash. My thoughts drifted back to the past. The cab ride took almost an hour in total. When I walked in, the house was dark and I thought it was cold. Josh wasn't home. That wasn't surprising. Brett was right in saying he needed time. Oddly enough, I found that I, too, needed time to formulate answers to some of the questions my husband was sure to have. What I never imagined, not once, was that Josh wouldn't come home. The last time I saw him, he was driving out of our neighborhood of small, sparsely built-up mansions. I was on my way home, so I didn't have a chance to turn around and try to catch up with him. I discovered that all of his belongings were gone. The movers must have gotten to him while I was at work. At first I sobbed, but then I got angry. How could he just leave me? Didn't even talk to me about it. I wrote him an emotional and smug message. He never responded. 2 days later, I decided to try to find him and maybe talk to my parents, my own and his sister. My sister Sheila was heartbroken when she answered the phone. "How could you, you bitch?" she screamed into the phone. "I loved that man. He was the best thing that ever happened to you, and this is how you repay him. What's wrong with you?" She was the first messenger. Beth, Josh's sister, was much worse. "What could you possibly want from me, you whore?" were the first words out of her mouth. No hello or anything. "I want to know where he is." I stood my ground. "I need to apologize and make things right." "Good luck with that, you idiot," she replied with pity. "I loved you like a sister." "Why? Explain it to me. I thought you were the best thing in his life. It doesn't matter. I don't know where he is." He only texted me about what happened, not even going into detail, and said he'd get back to me, but he needed time to reevaluate his life. When I called back 3 weeks later, Beth said she knew where he was but would never tell me. She said her best advice for me was to leave it alone and keep my hopes up or file for divorce. And after talking to my parents and getting over their disappointment, I found myself pondering alone. Was I really such a bad person? Well, of course I knew the answer to that question, although it took several months of therapy to confirm it. During that time, I gave myself my word to wait it out. I wouldn't file for divorce. I would also honor my vow of celibacy. This went on until mid-April. Brett was wary and kept his distance. I figured he was probably worried about my marriage and concerned for himself as well. The day I inquired about him with my team leader, I was informed that he had missed an appointment the previous week due to hospitalization. I got very concerned, found out what hospital he was in, and went to see him. He told me that he had been attacked. I didn't think he believed it. And I certainly didn't either, but I wasn't going to fight back. His last words hurt me deeply. "Alice," he said in a hushed whisper because of the injury to his neck. "I'd rather never see you again." Dinner had failed, and so had my Valentine's Day. Damn it, I thought, why? Why invite me to meet him here if only to humiliate me? I saw the owner of the table talking to the waiter, probably about how to treat me more delicately. It had been almost an hour since I'd sat down at the table. I turned my back to the window, wondering how I could get out of there with a modicum of dignity. The downpour had intensified since an hour ago. Despite the downpour, something in the well-lit cafe across the street caught my eye. A spectacular blonde with almost white hair sat looking into the eyes of her lover and holding his hand across the table. I shifted my gaze to the gentleman, and my heart nearly stopped. It was my husband, Josh. Or maybe it wasn't. The man had a well-groomed beard. The rain drummed on the glass. I studied him, hoping against all odds that I was wrong. They were laughing and making eyes at each other, and they were clearly a couple. They averted their gaze and uncrossed their arms. The man turned to the window and looked. He looked right at me. I was sure of it. Jumping up from my seat, I acted on pure emotion and adrenaline. Wallet, coat, check. Pulling out my wallet, I quickly crossed the dining room. Check. I handed my credit card to the maitre d' and on my way out, asked him to charge me for the lobster tail, promising to come back and sign the receipt. Of course, by the time I entered the cafe, they were already gone. By then, I was sure it had been his plan all along. They must have been ready to leave, just waiting for me to make my move. To mess with me. Never in my life had I felt so hopeless and humiliated. When I left the cafe, the waiter met me in the rain with my card, receipt, and phone number that I had left on the table. Another pity-filled look, which after all these months went down easier than the rain, and an insincere wish me luck. I walked back to the lobby of the steakhouse and hailed a cab. It was a little after 9:30. On the way home, I asked the driver to stop at a liquor store and tipped him $20 to come in and buy me a dose for the night. Money was still the least of my problems. I was able to hold on to it. All the way to my front door, I held on to it, and then when I walked in, the dam burst. I had such high hopes for this evening, hopes of reconciliation and love, so many other fantasies I'd conjured up in my dreams. Instead, I was alone, wet and freezing. He wouldn't come back. I would never get a chance to explain myself or apologize for my transgressions. Worst of all, he'd found someone else. The realization of how stupid that sounded in my own head triggered another bout of tears. I walked to the kitchen and pulled a wine corkscrew out of the desk drawer, but immediately put it back and reached into my bag for a bottle of vodka. The wine could wait. Living alone and celibate for a year was my own choice. I accepted the loneliness and even embraced it with joy. My parents, sister, co-workers, and even a few friends I'd kept in touch with since college tried to convince me to continue living my life. Only my therapist stood apart from the crowd. She told me unequivocally that being alone and realizing why I'd destroyed my marriage wasn't even close to the worst thing that could happen. Much better, she told me, than having another failed relationship. That night, as I poured a third vodka into my glass, it felt very different. I was truly alone. Even worse than that fateful night when I came home and found Josh gone. Well, this was it. Time to put on my big girl panties and move on with my life. The ringing of the doorbell made me jump. What else could this night bring? What more could I bear? There was a delivery man. He was even wearing some sort of uniform. I signed my name and he handed me a box in a plain brown wrapper and a bouquet of black roses. My heart dropped again. I placed both items on the kitchen table and examined them carefully. The first thing I noticed were the roses. They weren't black, as in dead. They were literally dead. Dried, rotted red roses. Probably the same bouquet Josh had held in his left hand when he stood there a year ago, stunned and destroyed, looking at me sitting in the passenger seat. I needed to think about it. Josh had spent the entire evening on his own terms, clearly scheduled for some time. That needed to change immediately. I pulled out my phone and started going through my messages until I found an unknown number that Josh had used to invite me to dinner. Then I typed, erased, and typed some more until I got the message I wanted to deliver. So, mission accomplished. One question: what's in the box? The answer came almost immediately. A gift. I wasn't going to play this game anymore. With shaking hands, I pressed the call button to dial the number. It switched to voicemail. I tried again with the same result. I leaned back in my chair to collect my thoughts and drained my glass of vodka. "Of course," I typed. It took him about a minute to respond. "I'm not lying. You'll never know unless you open it. Son of a bitch." The box was the kind of box you usually put in shirts or sweaters. Inside was the proverbial heavy manila envelope. When I opened it and stuck my hand inside, already anticipating its contents, several 12 by 18 centimeter glossy photos slid out onto the table. There was my husband with the blonde from the cafe. They were standing side by side, casually dressed, and someone was taking a picture of them with the Grand Canyon in the background. It made me sob. We had always planned to go there after we had our first child. Another photo captured the beautiful body of a blonde woman in a barely there bikini in some tropical location. The woman was perfection itself, right down to her cute little legs. I suddenly felt too depressed to be jealous. That would probably come later. Other pictures showed the two of them engaged in different activities or just burning love in each other's eyes. I pushed them aside. I looked inside the envelope and found two things: a handwritten note from my husband and a cover sheet entitled "Dissolution of Marriage." Looking through it, I saw that it had Josh's attorney's name and number on it. I picked up the note. "Alice, first of all, I want to apologize for my deception today. I thought long and hard about what our reunion would look like and how it might end. In the end, I realized that we would never be on equal footing if you couldn't experience what I experienced last Valentine's Day. Telegraphing about it wouldn't have been the same and wouldn't have done either of us any good. I couldn't find the words to express my sadness or disappointment in you last year, so I left. As Paul Simon said 50 years ago in his song, any words of mine at the time would have fallen on me like silent raindrops, and certainly yours." I decided we both needed silence, so I went in a different direction and started a new life, albeit not a temporary one. That's where and how I met Tiffany. She helped me heal and gain understanding. Sometimes she even advocated on your behalf. I won't bore you with the details, the pictures should be enough. If, after seeing them and reading this, you still have any interest in a possible reconciliation, call this number and we can set up a real date and time to talk. I don't expect forgiveness to be easy to obtain from either of us, but I'm here if you want to try. Josh. After rereading it, I set the letter aside. I noticed that the number listed was different from the one we had just communicated on. For a split second, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. There was still a chance. Then that joyous anticipation was obscured by a dark cloud of reality. Josh showed me exactly what I had done to him and demonstrated it very skillfully. I felt what he felt, what I had done to this man, my own husband, he could do to me in return. In that moment, I realized that I could never be with someone capable of hurting me as much as he had, like I had hurt him. He was still a teacher, and he still took me to school. I could never again truly love a man who could attack my heart and my emotions so coldly and cruelly. And I would have to live with myself for a long time, knowing that I was that kind of man too. The very last thing we deserved was each other. I realized then that my time would be spent self-reflecting and learning how to be a better person before I could trust myself with the heart of a new love. For a brief moment, my inner voice told me that I shouldn't give up so quickly. I took the pictures in my hands once more and looked through them carefully. Josh was happy with this woman, Tiffany. Through the rain, it was as clearly visible from across the street as it was in the crystal-clear photos. With a heavy heart and a sigh, I sat in silence for almost 20 minutes. Finally, my thoughts stopped fighting themselves. He hadn't lied. He really had given me a gift. I picked up my phone and started typing a text. I erased my words again and then stopped at what I wanted to say. "Thank you," I typed, adding a sad emoticon and then a determined one. I had only waited a few minutes. "You're welcome. I hope you have a good life, Alice. I'm planning to. Call a lawyer. Despite the prenup, I've been very honest. It's just money, and I have plenty of it. I hope you've learned from everything that happened, but it's not for me to dwell on it. I'll always remember you. He'll always remember, no tenderness or anything like that. Just remember. As for me, it'll be a long time before I forget about him, too. I walked over to the counter to pour myself another shot of vodka and fleetingly hoped that someday, perhaps in the distant future, I'd be able to enjoy Valentine's Day again.